Good afternoon and welcome. Today we are joined by Alex O'Gorman, who I've just established is probably about 300 meters away from where I am now, but we're going to stick with the online format. So Alex is a physiotherapist at British Triathlon currently, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing your story, Alex, and how you got to where you got to. So how are you doing?
Yeah, good mate. Cheers. Yeah, thanks Andy for having me on. Yeah, looking forward to it.
Great. So in terms of starting out, what made you want to get involved in like the medical physio area?
I guess really so to take it all the way back, I was I was a keen runner when I was younger, so I was a distance runner, sort of track, cross country, that sort of thing. And I was very fortunate to sort of live just outside of Sheffield and train a place called Don Valley around the same time as someone called Jess Ennis. And as you do, as you sort of get more into sport, you get a bit banged up and a bit injured. And at that time, I sort of had aspirations on becoming a doctor. Yeah, someone in Jess's group said, "Oh, you should go see this person in Leeds. She's called Ali Rose. She's quite good." So I was like, "Okay, fair enough." So I went up to Leeds. I think it was about 16, 17, and yeah, she beat the living crap out of me. Which was interesting, and then gave me a few exercises, and I thought, oh wow, this is really cool, So yeah, made my knee better, and I thought, oh, that's really interesting. It's another way to help someone who's in pain or injured, and so I was a bit interested in that, and then 8 months down the line, sort of got another knock, and I couldn't get to Leeds, so I saw a local physio, and no disrespect to the local physio I saw, but they stuck an ultrasound on me that didn't really do much, I would say. And so I was like, okay, so there's this, which was really stimulating, and I found really interesting in this. So I saw there was a degree of sort of different types of physio. So yeah, so I sort of was like, I'll go down that route and have a look at that. And then 2004, so literally late that summer, it was the Athens Olympics, and Kelly Holmes won 2 gold medals. And being a distance runner, I found that interesting, and she put it all down to her physio, Ali Rose, that had sort of got to the start line and stuff. So I was like, oh, I recognise that name, and I guess yeah, that's where it sort of sparked from there, really.
Right. And so how did that come to be then? So what did you start putting the A levels in place to start to do that then?
Yeah. So sort of, the typical thing. So looking at A levels, and I was already sort of, ticking the biology book box, and I was always really fascinated in the sports side of things. Sort of PE, almost like more around the physiology and the constructing of programs and coaching, as you'd say, really, basically, but how that all fit in, and then also how that kind of would sort of integrate into sort of bringing someone back from an injury. So I've always been someone who, I guess, likes puzzles, and also sort of quite inquisitive. So I just started to sort of like knock on doors. Can I watch your work? Can I chat to you about what you do? That kind of thing. And yeah, you send off your UCAS applications, and yeah, you see what comes back, and what interviews you have. So yeah, I was quite a shy, introverted child at that time. So yeah, I only actually got one offer, which was in Manchester. So that gave me a very easy choice. So then I hopped over the Pennines to Manchester, and yeah, I sort of started my physio journey there, really, at Man and yeah, it just went from there.
Really good. So whereabouts was there? Because I was actually just chatting with Mandy Johnson yesterday, who
Yeah.
works at MMU now. And so where was the campus then?
So the campus, so it was so interestingly, I guess when I applied, it was the School of Physiotherapy, which was actually attached to the University of Manchester. And that was in the old MRI eye hospital. So I remember sort of hopping on the train with my mum into Manchester, into Oxford Road and station. And my mum, being my mum, wanted to walk all the way down to the MRI. So yeah, walked all the way down, and then the old sort of like physio area was downstairs underneath, like almost in the basement. So I remember going down there and yeah, having this interview there, and yeah, must come across okay, and yeah, sort of had an acceptance letter pretty soon after that. And then it must have been around the sort of, I want to say either the May time, because the interview was back in sort of December time. So yeah, May time, I got a letter through saying, oh, our course has changed to Manchester Metropolitan University, and it was going to be at the Elizabeth Gaskell campus. So that's where I spent 3 years, Elizabeth Gaskell. So
Right.
yeah, just hopped over to Manchester, lived in Didsbury my first year, in East Didsbury, and then progressively got more and more lazy, I'd say. So me and my friend just moved closer and closer. So we lived in Rusholme by the end of it, and yeah, so that meant that we became curry connoisseurs by the end of it as well.
Yeah, no, very. Yeah, I know the strip well. So, and then when you were at university, then did you have any points? Did you think this maybe isn't right for you, or was it pretty much no, this is loving it the whole time?
I think what I really enjoyed about it was that and this probably impressed me from my dad, so my dad works in law, and he always gave us a very much a sense of like you need to work hard to sort of get ahead and do what you want to achieve. So he did his degree later on in life. So I have a twin sister, and we grew up basically weekends running around sort of like university libraries whilst he was studying. And then with his job, he'd always take work home. So his weekends quite often were sort of legal papers sprawled across the coffee table whilst he's watching sport on TV type thing. But yeah, he always said to us, don't get a job where you sat behind a desk with a shirt and tie for 60 hours a week. So the fact that physiotherapy very much is not behind a desk, it's quite an active physical job, but it can be very intellectually stimulating. And generally, a lot of people in the allied health profession and the medical space are just really good people who are really sort of interesting. Yeah, I think that sort of I took to that quite readily. Yeah, so I think that was a natural fit. I'd say I would say I found the hospital side of things or the NHS side of things. I'm a massive fan of the NHS and what it provides people, especially people with sort of less fortune and not as many avenues to sort of access healthcare. But sort of working in it, I definitely very quickly found frustrations, and I really sort of try and pride myself on excellence of work, and I don't like that being compromised. So yeah, I feel like gradually I moved to environments where I felt I could sort of be challenged and stimulated in areas that I was passionate about, but deliver work and a product in a certain way, that I was also sort of proud of.
Yeah, and so was that with your placements in the NHS, or was that mean when you graduated?
Yeah. So like typically everyone know you do sort of 5 generally big blocks of placements, and that was largely in NHS, all from like intermediate care and community and like orthopedics, outpatients, respiratory, neuro, all that sort of thing. My last placement was an elective placement, and I think as we chatted about before, I was a distance runner, and I was based in Manchester, obviously with sort of the Manchester Run Group, and my coach had sort of like sent me to 1 or 2 physios with niggles, and I just asked one of those if I could do an elective placement at their private practice. And it's a practice down in Stockport where the physio who owned the practice was working with British Cycling at the time. So Tim Dakin is his name. So SportMed is the clinic down in Stockport. Yeah, and so Tim allowed me to shadow and obviously do a placement there. And it was one of those where he'd asked me a few questions, and yeah, at the end of that placement, he said, would you like a bit of work? So I sort of jumped to the chance, and yeah, took on the offer for some work, and went straight into sort of private practice straight away. Just kind of like variable hours really, whilst sort of like trying to get that first sort of band 5 job as well. So then yeah, the next few years that's what I did, a bit of sort of evening private stuff, but yeah, band 5 NHS work.
And what we're working with Tim. Tim's a great guy. I bumped into him maybe the other week actually, but that because he was doing work at EIS as well, wasn't he? He was the
So
leader.
yeah.
And so, what was it like when you went into working in the private clinic? Was it what you were expecting?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, as an athlete that sort of you know had physiotherapy in the past, it was very sort of similar to what I'd experienced as a patient. I think what I found uh, I enjoyed about it, sort of relative to other environments, was the extra time you had. So with that time, you're just able to sort of connect with the patient more and able to sort of do a more thorough assessment and start to sort of think about what interventions you can put in place, and there was this opportunity to have that sort of deeper impact on them, really. And like you say, Tim, he was a very generous guy, and so he gave up a lot of time just to sort of run through things and increase my skill base and move on from there, really. So yeah.
And how long were you working there for?
I think I was there for about 3 years in total. So as I feel like I've just been very lucky, sort of bouncing along and sort of connecting with sort of just very good people and very good physios, because kind of then what happened as I sort of moved through on the NHS, I started out in Wythenshawe and then I moved across to Tameside, because my housemate from uni was working there and he said, "Oh, you should come work here. It's a good laugh." And like it's one of those hospitals. It's not as big as Wythenshawe, but I saw at Wythenshawe, I saw that there wasn't a lot of movement at that time with NHS jobs, and so there was some band fives that have been band fives for like up to 5 years, still trying to get their band six role. And my friend David moved very quickly through the bands in Tameside, and it was a case of it being a small hospital, that maybe isn't as supported. It meant that you sort of just got thrown into the deep end a bit, and I found that quite intriguing, where you just, you either sort of survive or don't type thing, really. So I went across, you to get chucked straight into the fire. Physios were leading on oxygen therapy at the time, and you were straight into ICU and doing a lot of the intervention there. And yeah, I'd moved through into it was a downgraded band 7 role to a band 6, so I sort of took that opportunity to then sort of head up the orthopedic rehab at Tameside at the time. And then yeah, through one of my training partners, who he's actually now sort of leading the endurance side of British athletics, so he's sort of gone down that road. He said to me, because I had a back issue, "Oh, you should see this guy Howard Turner in Wilmslow. He's very good at backs and SIJs." So I bobbed along to see Howard, and I don't know if you know Howard. He teaches on SIJ and integrated sort of treatment around the back, and he's an Australian, and he's very Australian, very relaxed, and it's this very calm demeanor. And physios treating physios, you talking shop, and he nonchalantly said to me, "Oh, you could do a bit of work here. Should hand in your CV." I was sort of, yeah, very funny, laughed it off. And then 2 weeks later, he emailed me. He's like, "I haven't got your CV." I was like, "Oh, you're being serious? Okay." So handed in CV, went along, and with Howard and one of the other clinicians at his practices, his wife Jo, had this 2-hour long interview. So going through anything and everything, and yeah, he said, "Oh yeah, we'll give you some work. We can do a few days here." And then one of my other training partners had been over to Worsley to see a physio called Duncan Mason, and he'd heard of me, and he said, "Oh, if Alex ever wants any work, let him know." So I thought I had this work lined up with Howard, and I was 23 at the time. I thought, well, why not, take a punt on private practice full time, and went and sourced Duncan out at a road race, introduced myself to him. It's like, "Yeah, come by the clinic," and yeah. So from there, I made a jump into fully private practice at the time, but in two environments I thought were environments where I would see a lot of patients I was interested in seeing, and with clinicians that I thought would be very sort of generous with their time and their experience and their knowledge, and able to sort of help mentor me and shape me in the direction I kind of wanted to go. So
Mm.
yeah, that was 23, and yeah, I was there for 7 years in both practices doing that.
Right. And so, do you think it was your running background that was that one of the main drivers? But like, what else was it about you that kind of they both wanted you to
Yeah,
work in their facility?
I think I definitely think I'm sort of an individual that has a certain amount of drive, and I'm quite inquisitive, and I'll always ask questions. So yeah, I think the common sort of thing that maybe has come back is a sort of, yeah, I've got this sort of element of drive. I'll if the door's half open, I'll try and force it open type thing, um, and yeah, I'm not scared to ask questions, and sort of be almost like be devil's advocate, and yeah, be a bit provocative with sort of my questioning, just to sort of, yeah, try and sort of explore, find out a bit more, and challenge narratives, but also challenge myself and my own thinking. So yeah, I think those are probably elements that have come back when I was younger. I think probably probably didn't always go about that the right way. I think as I've become older and more mature and got less hair, I've sort of managed to do it a little bit calmer, and maybe a bit more tactfully. So yeah, or at least I hope I have anyway. Um, Obviously, growing up in Yorkshire, I think bluntness is in my nature, but I try and temper that now. So
Yeah, and because at Duncan's place, he would have had Andy Walling was probably there then, wasn't he?
yeah,
And Chris Brammer, and so a really
yeah,
good team.
yeah. I'd say, like, so for me, two real cornerstones in terms of developing my clinical reasoning, my thinking, for me, is Howard and how he approaches things in this integrated model, but also sort of James Moore. I owe a lot to James and his generosity and sort of sharing how he sort of views things and how he thinks about things. So it would have been about 20, I want to say 2011, 2012. James did a hamstring presentation in the evening at Salford University, and I was me and Duncan both went along actually, and I was just blown away by what he presented and how everything was so evidence, not evidence based, but evidence informed, and yeah, from there, yeah, I've annoyed James now for over 10 years, poking at him and asking him for his time and questions and spending time shadowing him, and yeah, but obviously that came about from Duncan saying, come along to this hamstring thing, because he lectures at Salford University, and yeah, at the time it was a clinic where Chris Brammer was there as a young physio, and Chris has gone on to get his PhD in biomechanics, and he obviously works over in MIPS and runs a very successful running biomechanics and physiotherapy sort of integrated clinic there, and yeah, it's sort of, as someone who is also like a young physio, just having someone there, sort of almost like prompting you not to rest on your laurels, and sort of both have these interesting discussions around running injuries and pathologies and management of runners, and Andy Walling, like, Andy's, yeah, he's one of my closest friends, I'd say, and yeah, again, just his time and generosity and sharing everything that he's learned at his time at the IU, with some very, very good people, and since, yeah, I've just been very fortunate to be around these people, and who share with you, but also push you, and yeah, yeah, it was a really, really good time actually. So yeah, I just feel very, very lucky, and actually um, through sort of connections, I started to do little bits with British athletics around 2013. But it was really sort of through Andy. He got asked by a couple of marathon runners to go out to Font-Romeu to do to support an altitude camp, and he was a bit busy, so he said, "Oh, this physio Alex would, he's a runner, he's good. It'll be a good one to go with you." So I went out there. Just, it's meant to be for 10 days, and so I was there for 10 days, and towards the end of it, Shane, who was heading up British Athletics at the time, rang me up and said, "Oh, I believe you're out in Font-Romeu with some athletes." Said, "Yeah, well, we've got the camp coming in before European Championships and Commonwealth Games. Do you mind staying out?" No, not at all. So 10 days turned into 5, nearly 6 weeks, and yeah, I was doing a bit with orienteering at the time, so I then sort of went from Font-Romeu back to Manchester to treat an athlete who's racing the Commonwealth Games, over to Holland to race myself in Holland, back into the UK, and then over to Bulgaria for a week with orienteering. So yeah, that sort of started sort of what has become quite normal for me to bounce around different places treating and working with athletes.
So in terms of that then, so that was with British Athletics then, was it
Yeah.
that contract? So how did
Yeah.
that then become something as quite a mainstay of your
Mm.
working week?
Yeah, so I'd already done a few bits with British Athletics at the time, more like with their ACE model, which is sort of with their sort of pathway athletes sort of coming out of school into that sort of 17, 18 age bracket. And yes, I'd already started to do a few things around sort of screening and profiling, and then was out in Font-Romeu, and then I guess from there it just kind of built a bit of momentum. I must have done okay, got some good feedback, got asked to do some more things, and it built from there. And sort of by 2016, I was being asked to do quite a lot, and the endurance physio at the time, Kat McCormack, had was expecting and was going on maternity leave, and so Shane asked me if I'd take on the lead endurance physio role, you know, for a time. So I ended up doing that for 2017 and most of 2018.
Right.
So
And
just
where
built
is that
from there.
based? Where was that
That
based?
was based in Loughborough, at the HIPAC, so the National Performance Institute at the High Performance Centre. So that's on campus at Loughborough University. So that was my main base. But as I was in that role, sort of the spread of athletes sort of evolved at the time, because there was kind of two bases, mainly in Loughborough and then in West London in Teddington. For anyone who doesn't know, Teddington in West London is a bit of a endurance running mecca, not in the UK but also Europe. A lot of athletes sort of use that as a base in the summer, as their base to then sort of, because of the locality, to Heathrow, sort of bounce into Europe for meets. So I sort of, with cyclists, I always liken it to Girona, you know. So except it's not quite as sunny, and yeah, but the coffee shops are catching up. So yeah, that's a plus. So yeah, it was traditionally split between St Mary's University, which is an endurance hub, and Loughborough, and then that kind of evolved because of the changing of groups, and with a certain Laura Muir becoming more and more of a priority. So my time was literally split between sort of Loughborough, St Mary's, Brighton, and Glasgow. So for a period of time, I was sort of rotating through those areas, and sort of supporting the athletes there, and then developing the service so that we sort of had a bit more support, you know, just to help cope with the demand, really.
And that when you were doing this work, then there's a lot of travel. But it's also you're working at the top end of British sport and world sport. And
Yeah,
how did you find it? Was it enjoyable as you were hoping it was going to be?
definitely. It was like, definitely can say it's one of the most enjoyable periods of my life. Like, in the endurance running community is, it's a great bunch of people to work with, and like, yeah, just sort of really sort of fun people who have become very good friends. And yeah, the endurance team at that time, obviously I've mentioned Kat, but sort of, and Andy was sort of from the IOU. He was sort of involved as well. But Barry Fudge was head of endurance, and Kate Spilsbury of physiology, and Andy Shaw, and sort of Sophie Killer, nutrition. So these are all very, very sort of good people who are all experts in their fields as well. So sort of just all coming together, and yeah, just yeah, really fun time. Yeah, and it was quite a step change for me, having sort of been sort of very much in a clinic model, and sort of quite settled, sort of in Manchester, to then moving to the Midlands, but not really being home that much, and just almost having this nomadic existence was a big step change. But just being sort of, although I'd done stuff within British Athletics before, being more involved in those sort of integrated performance meetings, and those sort of more sort of higher level strategic discussions was a big step up as well. So yeah, it was a massive learning curve there for sure.
And did you find it challenging? Was that something that you felt out of your comfort zone?
Yeah, well, I'd definitely say for the first month or so, I definitely felt like there was an element of imposter syndrome going on. But you just kind of find your groove, and yeah, you just yeah, I was at the time, at British Athletics, and there's just some very good people there who support you. But yeah, ultimately you're all pushing towards the same goal, aren't you? So yeah, you just you learn to be sort of less siloed as you might be in private practice, and to sort of be more sort of collaborative and integrative, and all the buzzwords that you're meant to say, but like it's true. It's just the more like the more open you are, and the more that you can work with people, the easier life is for sure.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that throughout all of this, then, so you're a really high level runner yourself. Like, was there
Mhm.
ever a point when you were thinking that maybe that would become part of your career as well?
Uh, yeah. So what, as in, sorry, as in
Just
the,
being a runner, like, as in, would that ever
yeah.
something that you thought you could make a career of?
I mean, I think I had some dreamy aspirations of doing that. So I was okay as a junior. I would definitely say I was more of a late developer. And as I sort of developed as an athlete, I was in a group which had, European medalists, athletes that ran in the Olympics and Commonwealth Games, and represented Great Britain on cross country numerous times, top 5 European champs, that sort of thing. I kind of knew where that level kind of was, um, and I knew I wasn't quite there. I wasn't so far off, I would say. And this is sort of when I'm in my mid 20s, and then just when you start getting exposed through my work, working with the best of the best, and you see what Mo does in training, and you're just like, okay, that's the level. So you think like, oh yeah, it's here. You know, maybe if this drops right and that comes here, then maybe there's a chance that this could happen, type thing. And then you see that Mo's there, and you're like, okay, right. So, you know, 2016, I was sort of say I was getting asked to do more and more stuff professionally. I was 30. I'd sort of ticked a couple of goals off in my own running, and I almost just did this sort of needs analysis of, okay, well, I can sort of do this, and I might be able to do this, but I can help people do this, and that sounds pretty cool, So I just then made the decision that that was going to be my focus really, and yeah, so um, my wife runs, and she runs at a decent level, and she can't get her head around that I once ran like 100 miles a week, and it was a thing that my life circled around, and now I'm lucky if I run 100 yards a week. So yeah, I'm quite goal orientated, and so for me, as soon as my goal and my sort of direction changed, yeah, that changed quite rapidly.
Right. Well, it's a bit of hotbed round. So even did the Didsbury area, like Tom
Yeah,
Lancashire, Michael Rimmer, Eilish. I mean, amazing to see Alice McColgan doing so well recently.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, I've known Lanx for years, and trained with him in the past, and yeah, Ailish and Mike, I've worked with them, and uh, that God, those two definitely live a nomadic existence as well. They're in the area, but they probably have more of an argument that their base could be in Doha more than Manchester or Colorado. But yeah, I think it's great to see Ailish sort of coming through. She, as a youngster, everyone knows what her mum's done in the past, and she did get a lot of injuries when she was younger, but she's managed to build up that robustness, and yeah, sort of a lot of work actually from Chris Brammer, I would say, as well. And yeah, she's definitely sort of showing everyone now what her full potential could be, and I think she's going to hopefully go to the marathon very soon, and I think that's going to be very exciting if she manages to transfer her sort of 10K form into the roads.
Yeah, definitely no. Yeah, that the Commonwealth Games last year was phenomenal. that sprint finish was incredible. And then, so you were doing your work with British Athletics and in that area, where did you move on to next?
So sort of 2018 in the autumn, I transitioned down to London, so where my wife was living, so my girlfriend at the time, and I took up a lecturing post at St Mary's. They started a pre-reg master's course physiotherapy, and so yeah, I took up that post, and it seems that I knew one of my weaknesses was around public speaking, presenting, and I knew also that I wanted to sort of challenge myself a bit more in terms of areas that, you know, as you can imagine from our discussions, I was very sort of running focused and seeing a lot of running type injuries, but I knew there's still a lot of growth to be had. So, sort of, yeah, a lecturing role where you have to revisit a lot of foundational sort of work and principles to be able to deliver that seems like quite a nice opportunity, especially in an environment and a location, as I said before, was like a running hotbed, as it were, for endurance running. So yeah, I transitioned down there and was working, well, and I'm still working with St Mary's, but also seeing a large sort of proportion of runners down in West London, but more on a private sort of individual basis rather than NGB basis. And I still continued to and do continue to do stuff for British Athletics, you know, from then on. So 2019, still went out and did a few trips and camps, and I still went out and helped out at the World Championships in Doha in 2019.
And so was it quite nice being able to pick and choose these different things? Like you've kind of worked at the highest level, then you move into education, but still being able to dip into that. And even in private practice, you're working with really good teams to begin with.
Yeah. I think, you know, I think throughout my time, I've always tried to find. Well, for me, I want to work in places where sort of there's a really good culture. I think that's really important for me, but and a culture where it's like it's safe to almost like challenge each other, and then the other thing B is to constantly be challenged and be growing. So like yeah, growth is one of my sort of, I would say, personal values. So as long as I'm being challenged and I'm growing and still finding puzzles that intrigue me, then yeah, I'm happy with that. I'm stimulated by that. So yeah, when I was down in London, it was a really nice place to live, and it's exciting to be in another different environment. And yeah, one of the things I picked up down there was starting to work with a professional sprint group over in East London as well. So obviously, a lot of my athletics work was endurance heavy, so starting to work with sprinters was really nice. And my master's is in strength and conditioning, so I'd already sort of started to be more and more intrigued by, you know, sort of the performance aspect of sort of interventions and you know, training stimulus, and yeah, so that, you know, how that then comes into a speed power model, I found very interesting.
Mm. Yeah. And so how long were you in London for?
So we moved back to Manchester. Or I say we, my wife moved into our house in July of 2022, and I say we have different move-in dates because I didn't actually get to see the house until the middle of September, because of my work with INEOS at the time. So I was just away continuously. So yeah, I put a lot of faith in my wife's taste, which has worked out all right. So
Yeah, very,
yeah,
very wise, I would say. Probably, I'm sure that's
yeah.
the right way to go. So INEOS, then, how did that come about?
Uh, Quite simply, there was just, you know, a job advert in 2019, and yeah, I just thought, oh, that's interesting. So I think as a kid, my father was a cyclist, and so I've grown up, you know, being a massive fan of the sport. It was like, rather than football being on TV growing up, it was Paris-Roubaix or Paris-Nice or Tour de France or whatever. And so I grew up being a fan of cycling, but always having a bike as well, and doing a bit of riding. And as I said, sort of through probably that interaction with Ali Rose, sort of like it'd be really nice if one day I could work for UK or British athletics and be their endurance physio, and work with the best endurance athletes in the world, or endurance runners. But also if there's a chance to work with a cycling team in Tour de France, that kind of thing, that'd be amazing. So yeah, when I saw that opportunity, I put my name in the hat and went through that process, and yeah, was fortunate enough to become part of the team, as it was then known. It had previously been known as Team Sky, but then was known Team INEOS, and is now known as INEOS Grenadiers. So yeah, that was an interesting experience for sure.
So with that, then was that the first time you'd ever done cycling sort of support and rehab at that level then?
Yeah, at that level, I'd say sort of private practice. You work with sort of cyclists and triathletes, for sure. But yeah, that was the first time in at that level, which is essentially you would say it's the pinnacle of cycling. Really, it's world tour level. It's they liken themselves to the Real Madrid of cycling, really. So like there's this bit Fran put together where it was sort of like the most successful sport teams in the world, and you look at the various sports and you can say Mercedes F1 has won how many F1 championships, and Real Madrid have won how many Champions Leagues, and it's like, well, INEOS, the amount of Grand Tours that INEOS has won in their various forms or names, it's statistically the most successful sports team in the world. So, and yeah, it's a massive opportunity. I found it really, the opportunity to be part of that sporting organisation and that sort of high performance monster was something that was just a massive opportunity, I thought. And yeah, I thought it was a great time.
So what were some of the things that it sounds like that seemed to be even more maybe financially in a better position, I'm guessing was a key part of it, but what were the things that really made it stand out?
So I guess financially it was nice. I'm not someone who's particularly driven by money, I must say, and so I've never.
Oh, I didn't mean you. I meant the budget for the team.
Yeah, I mean, in the team wise, they have the biggest budget in the world tour, which can make things easier sometimes, I guess. I'd say the big things for me is like I found it really interesting because there was some great opportunities there to see some great individuals sort of work and problem solve around stuff. So Dave B especially, I think it goes without saying sort of how much of a driver of high performance he can be. And to have the opportunity to see him as a team leader and how he worked, I thought that was just a real privilege. I think some of the problem solving around performance support as well, it's really, really interesting. But also the big takeaway, and I think the big takeaway from being in that environment with that team, but also on the endurance side, being privileged enough to work with like Mo and his team, and like obviously Alberto is one of the world's best endurance coaches, and Laura with Andy Young, and Jake Whiteman, who I still work with now, and Jeff, is that they're very much just normal people, and the normal people who are just looking at a problem and just trying to sort of solve a problem. And I think I've been very fortunate to come across some people who are great thinkers, and I'd also put in there like Barry and Steve Fudge on the endurance and sprint side as well. Just really great thinkers, and what it comes down to for me is that they can look at a problem and they can understand the nuance and the complexity of the problem, but they can then sort of zoom out of it and deliver it in a very simple way. And so like the strategies around solving a problem, the programming around stuff, it all looks remarkably simple, and someone might look at it and go, well, that's really basic, but it's basic that's supported by a depth of sort of complexity and nuance. I liken it to a story that Alex Wolff gave once that I've heard, where he talks about problem solving around rowing and key determinants of rowing, and essentially he reverse engineered rowing, transfer the gym impact on rowing to essentially being the key determinant being knee torque and the key exercise being a leg press, which I stole from him and put into the cycling world. But yeah, and I very much quote Alex every time I do that, I'm sure. But yeah, it's just that having that understanding to then go all the way back to it's just this simple solution or this simple intervention. And that's sort of the key thing that I would say I see across a lot of sort of high performance environments.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I think it is. Sometimes it's so nice when you got someone that can just explain something, even if it
Yeah,
sounds really simple and obvious. It's like actually, that's the most powerful message, isn't it? A lot of the time.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, so how long were you in INEOS for?
So 3 seasons. So yeah, 2019 through to 2022, and so through that time, I became the lead rehab therapist whilst I was there. So there's a couple of big projects that we undertook at the time, which were quite stimulating and yeah, quite interesting. So that was quite nice, but it was a lot of travel and a lot of time on the road for sure. So yeah, so at the end of 2022 season, I transitioned from INEOS, and Doug had given me the opportunity with being back in Manchester to do some stuff at Altius, and I still had my St Mary's role, so it was quite a nice time to sort of step aside and yeah, go into another phase really.
Mm. And how did you find like the Tour de France and being involved in that? I loved hearing some of Phil Bert's stories and just I really
Yeah,
found it fascinating. Just like again the meticulous nature that you mentioned, Dave Brailsford before.
yeah. So I never actually went on the Tour de France. So the Grand Tour I worked on was La Vuelta, which is the Tour of Spain, and but obviously in the build up to tour, the tour is a big focus, and so obviously part of the team, you're in that sort of build up and working towards that, and so see, last year I was on a fair few races that actually led into that stream into the tour. So with the likes of G and Tom Pidcock and those guys. Um, so yeah, I think it's really interesting. There's a lot of commonalities of many different competition environment, whether it's triathlon or cycling or athletics. You know, the biggest change that I saw and is just constant travel and change of environment actually. So within cycling, quite often if you're doing a stage race, you're changing hotels every night. You're obviously the bulk of the day is the stage race, and so whilst the stage race is going on, you're out in a car sort of supporting the stage with feeds. So like one of the DSs was trying to explain to nutritionists what cycling is like, and obviously forgive the math, but to quote him, he said it's half F1, half Romany gypsy lifestyle, and half sort of like traveling circus, wacky races. So yeah, it's very much wacky races. You're driving. I remember in the Vuelta this year, one of the stages finished at the top of Sierra Nevada, um, and then the next stage was in Alicante. So if your geography of Spain is any good, they're not round the corner from each other. So literally at the end of that stage, at the top you've got all the cars that have sort of team vans that have sort of been either in the race or supporting the race, sort of finish up at the top where the team bus is, where all the cyclists are there, um, and you think there's 13 teams or whatever. They all then want to get off this mountain at the same time, and they're all trying to get to Alicante as quick as possible. So we just had this situation where you have like sort of both sides of the dual carriageway, so 4 lanes, um, full of motorbikes, cars, vans, buses, all going downhill. I would say somewhat near the speed limit, maybe a touch over, but interweaving out of each other, and police convoy ahead that are just chucking cars off the road left, right and centre into lay-bys, and you just sort of going down and you're thinking, I didn't learn this at physio school, you know. Whilst you're driving down, making sure that you're not going to crash into a motorbike that's undertaking you or something like that. Yeah, so it is a really bizarre world that just bounces around, you know, in its own little bubble. But yeah, I think there's some cool stuff that goes on there, and coming from athletics, where I would say athletics is a very physiological dominant sport. Like, so you might say like football or rugby is quite a tactical, technical sport. Physiology is a determining factor in athletics. Cycling, there's tactics, but it's I would also say it's like a lot of the work around the aero position and drag is a key determinant there. So just seeing how the problem solving and technology, and you know how like guys like Dan Bigham work, it's really interesting for sure.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting analogy on all of it. And then so moving back to Altius, then how have you found that?
Good. I mean, it's a really nice team to work with. Obviously, you know, Doug, and Doug's got a lot of experience, especially in rugby and team sports, and in you know, extreme sports. So Doug was part of our medical advisory group at INEOS around a project we had around. So one of our key riders, again, Bernal, had unfortunately ridden into the back of a park bus at 60 kilometers an hour in head down TT positions, which meant that we had a very big polytrauma sort of case on our hands, and quite a high profile one too. So our sort of integrated performance lead had sort of put together a medical advisory group to help keep us honest, really, and peer review the work we were doing. And Doug was part of that, and Doug's got a lot of experience, as you know, with sort of snow sports and Red Bull athletes and what have you. And from our interactions, Doug offered me the opportunity to sort of go back into sort of work with Altius, and it's been really good. It's a good team. There are a lot of experienced practitioners, and a nice environment to work in.
Yeah, and then in terms of, I really enjoyed the chat with Doug that I've had previously with him on this as well, talking about building the team but like, what do you see as not just Altius, but in general, like what are the non-clinical traits that you think are really important to be a successful physio team member or anything?
Yeah, so for me, I would say sort of honesty and integrity are key, you know, and tied in with that, it's being honest in a kind way as well, and being honest at the right time, I think, and being able to have those discussions sort of without sort of fear of like, oh, what's the reaction going to be there, or even like, you know, sort of putting your guard up, being open to that conversation. So honestly, openness, ability to sort of want to grow and learn is key. And then I'd say generosity is quite common. I've seen in the good environments I've been. I'd say honesty or integrity, generosity, and then openness to being challenged and growing are the common sort of attributes, and that's how I try and sort of I guess sort of deliver myself, really, and try and lead by that sort of example. I think if you're sort of working like that, then you can be very successful.
And then with that, so is that the sort of traits that you're looking for when you're going into any team, because you want that back from your employer or, you know, your team as well, don't you?
Yeah, if I'm in an environment where it's almost like if there's a fear culture, or people don't like to be challenged, or indeed that no one is challenging me, then I'm quite happy to say, you know what, that's not really for me. So I'm gonna take a step to the side here and look for the next thing.
Yeah, No, very wise. And then in terms of forming these things, obviously you got your own just experience. But do you read any books? Like, how do you switch off? Is it fiction, or is it like professional development?
Yeah, more down the professional development side for sure. So I guess another side I might have is I actually coach athletics, and so with part of that, I read a lot around sort of leadership and culture and sort of communication and that kind of thing. I'd say for the last 5 or 6 years, I've read a lot around sort of like behavioral organization. I've read a lot around sort of like behavioral psychology. So whether it's, your Steve Peters chimp paradox, and obviously being at INEOS, Steve's very much embedded into INEOS, and Steve's thinking is very much embedded into it. And Robbie Anderson is the team psych there, who is Steve's business partner. So that chimp language is very much embedded. Where Daniel Kahneman's thinking fast and slow, and then Damien Hughes's books, organizational culture. So like Barcelona Way. I think there's like some key readings that I've always sort of latched on to their thinking really, and yeah, found that quite useful.
Yeah, and you must have come across some, like, if you're working with Steve Peters, and I know, suppose for you, they're just like you said before, they're normal people, and you kind of just happen to be in that world. But for
Yeah.
people on the outside, like I haven't worked directly in any of these environments. What is it like when you say working with a Steve Peters? Is it something where you think, wow, this is incredible, or is it just like just Steve?
Yeah, it's like, so I only had a few interactions with Steve, and it's quite funny actually, because I would actually say, like, and Steve doesn't remember this, but my first interaction with Steve was when I was like 13, because he used to train down at Don Valley, and yeah, so it was back then he was a masters athlete, so yeah, so he was a masters athlete training at Don Valley, and yeah, he knew my coach, and so we'd just had a very brief interaction there, and then obviously years later, INEOS, again you have this interaction with him, and he's just very to the point, um, but he's to the point with an element of kindness, I would say, and matter of fact. But most of the conversations in that area was with Robbie, who, like, again, he always would take it back to, like, what do we actually know? And yeah, these are people that are experts in their field and very skilled at sort of delivering stuff, just in just the right way. And I think it's just they're normal people who are just very, very good at their jobs, and are very skillful in their areas, and yeah, they just deliver it as you might expect, really.
Yeah, yeah. No, no. Well, it's a really interesting area of mine as well. So, what's next for you then?
So really, last couple of months, I've started working with British Triathlon, and joining the team over in Leeds there. Again, opportunity that came up, which obviously with my endurance running background and my cycling background seemed like a really natural fit. But I was also very aware that it was a team where, like, Ollie Williamson had been working there for a number of years, and Ollie, I'm sure you know, is a great guy, and I sort of heard a lot about Ollie and not had the chance to meet him before then, but the chance to work with someone like Ollie was like, oh, that's a real sort of, I saw that as a real opportunity, and then just being aware of the culture within triathlon, where you'd had Ollie and then Emma, who's now at Manchester City. They've been there for a number of years. It just seems like uh, a small team, but a small, effective, high performing team that um, yeah, had a good culture about it, because it wasn't a team where you had high turnover. I've seen that before, where there's a high turnover of people, and you sort of learn to maybe ask why there's a high turnover. So yeah, yeah, just the opportunity to go in, and I'd had a meeting before with their performance support leader, Ian Piper, who is a good guy, and a great guy in fact, and yeah, got on very well with him. So just this opportunity to work with very good people, and some of the athletes there I already knew because they dip into endurance running or had been endurance runners previously. So like your Beth Potters and your Alexies, so I already knew them a bit, and so it was the opportunity to go and work with these athletes. It's like, yeah, so it seems like another fun experience. So yeah, I'm with the lecturing at St Mary's and the private work at LTS. I'm also British Triathlon and still like working with the likes of Jake and what have you. So it keeps me busy, that's for sure.
Yeah, no, sounds like it. And then I meant to ask as well, did you ever meet Jim Radcliffe when you were at INEOS?
I met him very briefly, and that was actually when I went for my interview. So INEOS have a HQ, actually a couple of times. So INEOS have a HQ in Mayfair. So whilst I was sat in reception waiting for that, Jim came down and he sat and put on his dirty Hoka trainers to go for a run. And I asked him why he didn't have the new Nike Vaporflies. You know, seeing as he's got a couple of pennies in his back pocket. And then obviously their other HQ is or one of their other HQs is main bases in Monaco. So the cycling team have two main bases, which is Monaco, which is out of the INEOS offices, and then Andorra. And so I would go to those bases quite frequently. And so when I was in Monaco, yeah, I bumped into Jim and we had a bit of a chat there as he was sort of coming out of the gym. So
yeah, well, it'd be interesting to see if he buys Man United. I think Tom Lancashire may want him to be doing that.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Obviously, the INEOS sport is growing, and as well as the cycling team, there's Mercedes F1 and OGC Nice and Lausanne and the All Blacks and INEOS Britannia. So he's got quite a portfolio sort of building. So whether it's Jim who takes on United, I'm a United fan myself. So yeah, whether it's Jim or whether it's the chaps from Dubai, I think as long as there's some money put into the club and yeah, Ten Hag can be left alone to run it the way he wants, I think we'll be all right.
Yeah, well, no, definitely. You needed last night's win anyway. After we won't mention last weekend's.
Yeah, no, I've yeah. Well, I wasn't aware of what happened last weekend. It's been blank from my memory. So so yeah, but no, last night was fun, and yeah, I'm sure Mr. Walling's enjoying it as well. So
Yeah, well, no, exactly. But I think Tom flew off to Rwanda, didn't he? He was like he was that upset with it. He said, "I'm getting out of here." So
yeah,
yeah,
he'll be back by the end of the season, I'm sure.
yeah, no, exactly. Hey, look, Alex, really appreciate your time today, and thanks for sharing all of your history and memories and some of those stories. And I look forward to catching up with you soon.
Yeah, not a problem, mate. Good to chat, and maybe catch a coffee as soon as we're around the corner.
Absolutely. I'm in Wine and Wallop at 5:30. You're welcome to join.
Oh, brilliant, mate. Will do.
Good man. See you later.
See ya.